I'm Bethany, 29 years old, and I grew up in a tight-knit family in small-town Wisconsin. My parents were everything to me, and I always believed they would be my biggest supporters no matter what. We weren't wealthy, but we had enough. At least that's what I thought. Until that night, my father's words sliced through me like a knife, words I never imagined hearing from him. If you've ever felt misjudged by family, let me know where you're watching from and subscribe to join our community of survivors. Growing up in Mapleton, Wisconsin, our life wasn't fancy, but it was comfortable. My father, James, worked as a construction manager for a local company. He had built his career from the ground up, starting as a laborer and working his way into management through sheer determination and skill. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and calloused hands that told stories of hard work. Those same hands would ruffle my hair affectionately or steady my bicycle when I was learning to ride. My mother, Lisa, worked part-time as a nurse at Mapleton General Hospital. She was the peacekeeper in our family, always the voice of reason and compassion. With her gentle smile and patient demeanor, she balanced my father's occasionally stern approach to parenting. Their relationship always seemed like a perfect partnership to me, each complementing the other's strengths. During my early years, my bond with my father was something special. Every Sunday morning, rain or shine, we would go fishing at Lake Mapleton. I remember sitting in our small rowboat, watching the sunrise paint the water orange and pink, while Dad taught me how to bait a hook or cast my line. Those quiet moments on the lake, just the two of us, are some of my most treasured memories. Fishing teaches patience, Bethany, he would say, his voice steady and reassuring. Life isn't about instant gratification. Sometimes you have to wait for the good things. When I wasn't at school or fishing with Dad, I was his little helper around the house. He loved DIY projects, and our weekends were often filled with the sounds of power tools and the smell of sawdust. He taught me how to measure twice and cut once, how to drive a nail with just a few precise strikes, and how to sand wood until it was smooth as silk. I absorbed his lessons, eagerly proud to be working alongside him. "You've got a good eye for detail, Bethy," he'd praise, examining my careful painting or sanding. "That's going to serve you well in life." My school years were marked by academic achievement. I worked hard to bring home report cards that would make my parents proud. Math and science came naturally to me, and by high school, I was taking advanced placement classes and dreaming of college. My father would proudly display my academic awards on our living room wall, sometimes bringing them up when his coworkers visited. "My Bethany's going to be somebody important someday," he'd announce, his arm around my shoulders. "Mark my words." Our family wasn't rich, but during those early years we were financially stable. We took modest family vacations to nearby states, usually camping or staying in budget motels. Christmas mornings were abundant with thoughtfully chosen gifts, and we never worried about having food on the table or clothes for school. Life wasn't luxurious, but it was secure. The first signs that things might be changing came during my junior year of high school. I overheard snippets of conversation between my parents late at night, hushed voices discussing numbers and payments. My father's construction company was facing increasing competition from larger firms moving into our area, and contracts were becoming harder to secure. I noticed subtle changes around the house. The refrigerator started making a strange noise, but instead of calling a repair service as he would have in the past, Dad spent a weekend trying to fix it himself. Our annual family vacation was shortened from 1 week to a long weekend. Mom picked up extra shifts at the hospital. When I asked about these changes, my parents dismissed my concerns with reassuring smiles. "Just being a bit more careful with money, sweetie," Mom would say. "Nothing for you to worry about." But I couldn't help noticing my father's demeanor changing too. His laugh became less frequent. His shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight, and sometimes he would stare into space at the dinner table, lost in thoughts he wouldn't share. I tried to ease their burden by applying for every scholarship I could find for college. When my acceptance letter arrived from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, along with a partial scholarship, I was ecstatic. My mother cried happy tears as she hugged me tight. My father's reaction was more complex. Pride shone in his eyes as he read the acceptance letter, but when he saw the scholarship information and remaining costs, a shadow crossed his face. "This is a great opportunity, Bethy," he said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. We'll make it work somehow. That night, I heard my parents discussing finances again. Despite their whispers, I could make out phrases like second mortgage and retirement savings. A knot formed in my stomach as I realized the burden my education would place on them. The next morning, I approached them about considering a less expensive state college. Absolutely not, my father said firmly. You've worked too hard for this opportunity. We'll figure out the money. The night before I left for college was the last truly warm moment I remember with my father. He knocked on my bedroom door as I was finishing my packing. Got a minute? He asked, holding something behind his back. When I nodded, he entered and sat on the edge of my bed. From behind his back, he produced a small wooden box with intricate carvings on the lid. I made this for you, he said softly, for your jewelry and special things at college. The box was beautiful, polished to a warm glow with my initials carved into the top. Inside, he had lined it with velvet. So you'll remember home, he added, his voice slightly rough with emotion. I hugged him tight, breathing in the familiar scent of sawdust and his aftershave. I'm so proud of you, Bethy, he whispered. So damned proud. I had no way of knowing then that those words of pride would become increasingly rare in the years ahead, or that the father who made me a keepsake box with such love would one day tell me I was nothing but a burden. College was everything I had dreamed of and more. The University of Wisconsin-Madison campus buzzed with energy and ideas. My business administration classes challenged me intellectually, and I thrived in the academic environment. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who were as passionate about learning as I was, and I formed quick friendships with classmates who shared my drive. To help cover my expenses beyond what my scholarship provided, I juggled part-time jobs throughout my college years. I worked mornings at a campus coffee shop, evenings at the university library, and weekends as a tutor for underclassmen struggling with business statistics. Between classes, work, and studying, my days started at 5 in the morning and often ended after midnight. The exhaustion was real, but so was my determination to minimize the financial burden on my parents. Despite my busy schedule, I called home every Sunday evening without fail. During my freshman year, these calls were lengthy and warm, with both parents eager to hear about my classes, friends, and campus life. By sophomore year, I noticed a shift. The conversations grew shorter, with my father often passing the phone to my mother after just a few perfunctory questions about my studies. He's just tired, honey, Mom would explain. Work has been stressful. The strain in her voice told me there was more to it than simple fatigue, but I didn't press. Part of me didn't want to know how bad things might be getting at home. My first trip home for Thanksgiving break brought the changes into sharp focus. Our house, once meticulously maintained by my father, showed signs of neglect. The gutter was sagging on one side, the front steps needed repainting, and the lawn, my father's former pride, was overgrown in patches. Inside, I noticed the dishwasher had been replaced with a much cheaper model, and several small appliances were missing from the kitchen counters. That night, I woke to the sound of my parents arguing in hushed but intense voices downstairs. We can't keep doing this, Lisa, my father said, his voice tense with frustration. The business is barely staying afloat. She deserves this chance, James, my mother replied. We agreed we would make it work. I know what we agreed, he snapped. But I didn't expect Johnson Construction to underbid me on every damn contract in the county. I crept back to my bedroom, a heavy weight settling in my chest. The economic downturn was hitting small businesses hard, and my father's construction company was clearly suffering. Meanwhile, my mother was picking up extra hospital shifts to compensate working nights and weekends that left her looking permanently exhausted. The guilt I felt about my college costs was overwhelming despite my scholarship and the jobs I worked. During my junior year, I seriously considered dropping out to help my family financially. I researched jobs I could get with my partial degree and calculated how quickly I could start contributing to household expenses. When I broached the subject during spring break, both my parents adamantly refused to consider it. You will finish your degree, my father said, pounding his fist on the kitchen table. We didn't sacrifice all this for you to quit now. It was the word sacrifice that stuck with me, the way he emphasized it with bitterness I hadn't heard before. It was the first time he had openly acknowledged the financial strain my education was causing, and it changed something between us. As my college years progressed, my father's demeanor during my visits home continued to deteriorate. He spent more time at work or in his garage workshop alone, and when he did join family dinners, his contributions to conversation were minimal or tinged with subtle resentment. "How's the expensive education going?" he asked during one holiday dinner, the words casual but the undercurrent unmistakable. "It's going well, Dad," I replied carefully. "I made the dean's list again this semester." "That's nice," he said flatly. "Hope it's worth it." My mother would jump in to change the subject. Her smile strained as she offered more mashed potatoes or asked about my friends. After such exchanges, I would catch her following my father to the kitchen or garage, their whispered arguments becoming a familiar soundtrack to my visits home. To reduce the burden on my parents, I took out additional student loans during my final year, telling them I had received another small scholarship. The lie weighed on me but seemed kinder than adding to their financial stress. I knew the loans would be my responsibility after graduation, but with the promising job market for business graduates, I wasn't overly concerned about repaying them. My graduation day should have been a celebration, a culmination of 4 years of hard work and sacrifice. My parents attended my mother beaming with pride despite the dark circles under her eyes. My father stood stiffly in his one suit, which hung slightly looser on his frame than it had at my high school graduation. He shook my hand formally after the ceremony, a gesture that felt distant compared to the bear hugs my classmates received from their fathers. "Congratulations," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. We went to dinner at a modestly priced chain restaurant afterward, a far cry from the upscale celebration I knew my father had once planned to mark this milestone. The conversation was stilted, revolving around safe topics like the graduation speaker and the weather forecast. No one mentioned my future plans or job prospects, as if the subject was too loaded to broach. As I hugged my parents goodbye before they drove home, and I returned to my campus apartment, my father held on a moment longer than usual. "Make it count," he said quietly. "All of this makes sure it was worth it." I didn't realize then how prophetic those words would be, or how quickly the job market would prove far more challenging than any of us had anticipated. The economic recession hit just as I was entering the job market with my freshly minted business degree. Companies that had been actively recruiting on campus months earlier suddenly implemented hiring freezes. Entry-level positions vanished overnight, replaced by requirements for years of experience I couldn't possibly have as a new graduate. My carefully crafted resume highlighting my academic achievements and leadership roles in student organizations generated only a handful of interviews during those first months. Each one ended the same way: "We've decided to go with a candidate with more experience," or "We're actually restructuring that position." The rejection emails accumulated in my inbox like fallen leaves. Meanwhile, my student loan grace period was quickly running out. The statements arrived monthly, the numbers seeming to grow despite no actual payments being due yet. 6 months after graduation, I would need to start making substantial monthly payments on debt that now totaled just over $45,000. To keep myself afloat, I took a job at a retail clothing store in the mall, folding sweaters and ringing up purchases for slightly above minimum wage. The irony of using my business degree to calculate percentage discounts for customers wasn't lost on me. I shared a cramped apartment with 2 other recent graduates in similar situations, all of us wondering how our carefully planned futures had derailed so quickly. Every night I scoured job boards and sent out applications. Every morning I checked my email hoping for positive responses. Most days brought nothing but automated rejections or silence. The few interviews I managed to secure led nowhere, each disappointment chipping away at my confidence. After 4 months of this routine, my financial situation became dire. My meager retail salary barely covered my share of rent and utilities, leaving almost nothing for food or other necessities. I had maxed out my only credit card buying professional clothes for interviews that went nowhere. When my car needed unexpected repairs, I had no choice but to call my parents for help. "We don't have it, Bethany," my mother said gently. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Your father's company lost another major contract last month." The decision to move back home temporarily was painful but necessary. I had always imagined returning to Mapleton as a successful professional, perhaps visiting on holidays with stories of my achievements. Instead, I was crawling back with nothing but debt and disappointment to show for my education. My mother welcomed me with a warm hug when I arrived, her eyes reflecting a mix of happiness to see me and concern for my situation. My father's greeting was considerably cooler, a brief nod and a muttered, "Welcome back," before he retreated to his garage workshop. The house seemed smaller than I remembered, the furnishings more worn, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken tension. I settled back into my childhood bedroom, now stripped of many of its personal touches. My mother had converted it partially into a sewing room after I left for college, and my return clearly disrupted her space. I stacked my meager belongings in corners, living out of suitcases to minimize my footprint in the house. "It's just temporary," I assured my parents over dinner that first night. "I'm applying for jobs every day. Something will come through soon." My father chewed his food slowly, his expression unreadable. "The local grocery store is hiring cashiers," he finally said. "At least it would be some income." "James," my mother admonished softly, "Bethany needs a position in her field." "Beggars can't be choosers," he replied, his voice flat. "That degree isn't paying bills." The comment stung, but I forced myself to remain calm. "I have an interview with an accounting firm in Milwaukee next week," I said. "It looks promising." He merely grunted in response and returned to his meal. The household tension increased daily. I did everything I could to make my presence less burdensome, taking over cooking duties, cleaning the house thoroughly, and handling grocery shopping. I applied for local positions in addition to jobs in my field, securing part-time work at the town library to contribute something to household expenses. Yet my father seemed to take my presence as a personal affront. His passive-aggressive comments became a regular feature of our limited interactions. "Must be nice to have time for afternoon TV," he would remark, finding me taking a brief break between job applications. "That fancy education teach you how to load a dishwasher properly?" he asked another time, rearranging the plates I had stacked. My mother tried to mediate, often pulling him aside for whispered conversations that would temporarily improve his behavior. But the underlying resentment remained palpable, filling our home with an emotional heaviness that made it hard to breathe. As weeks stretched into months, my confidence eroded further. Each morning, I would dress professionally and head to the library or local coffee shop with my laptop, determined to send out more applications and make networking calls. Each evening, I would return home to my father's judgment, implied or explicit, about my failure to launch my career. The promising interview in Milwaukee ended like all the others with a polite rejection email. I cried in my car for an hour afterward before driving home, knowing I would have to report another failure to my increasingly impatient father. His drinking, which had always been moderate in the past, became more frequent and heavy. He would come home from work and immediately pour himself 2 fingers of whiskey, then another, and sometimes another, his mood darkening with each glass. On those evenings, my mother would catch my eye and subtly shake her head, our signal that I should make myself scarce. After particularly difficult weeks, I would call my college friend Samantha, who had managed to secure a marketing position in Chicago. The contrast between our post-graduation experiences was painful, but her friendship offered a lifeline of normalcy. "You could come stay with me," she offered during one tearful phone conversation. "My couch is yours until you find something." I seriously considered her offer, calculating whether my library salary could cover a bus ticket to Chicago and minimal expenses while job hunting there. The prospect of escaping the suffocating atmosphere at home was tempting, but something held me back. Perhaps it was hope that things would improve, or reluctance to admit complete defeat by fleeing to a friend's couch. By the 3-month mark of living at home, the situation had become nearly unbearable. My father and I existed in a state of Cold War, exchanging only necessary communication. My mother walked on eggshells, trying desperately to maintain peace. I applied for jobs with increasingly frantic energy, knowing my welcome was wearing dangerously thin. Then came a rare bright spot. A family dinner that began pleasantly, with my mother preparing my father's favorite pot roast and even buying a bottle of wine. My father arrived home in an unusually good mood, mentioning a potential new contract for his business. The conversation flowed more easily than it had in months, and for a brief moment, I glimpsed the family we had once been. I should have known better than to expect it to last. The white envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, addressed to me with the Student Loan Servicer's logo prominently displayed in the corner. I planned to open it privately later, knowing its contents would only add to my stress. But when I came downstairs for dinner that evening, the envelope sat opened on the kitchen table, my father standing over it with a stormy expression. "Dad." "That was addressed to me," I said, a knot forming in my stomach. $45,000, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. $45,000 in student loans. Were you planning to tell us about this? My mother appeared in the doorway, her expression anxious. "James, let's discuss this calmly over dinner." "I thought you had scholarships," he continued as if she hadn't spoken, his finger jabbing at the numbers on the statement. "You told us you had it covered." "I had partial scholarships," I explained, my voice small. "And I worked throughout college. But yes, I had to take out some loans, especially in my final year." "Some loans?" He laughed bitterly. "This is more than I make in a year now, Bethany. More than I make in a year." Dinner was a tense affair. My father ate in rigid silence while my mother attempted to maintain light conversation. I pushed food around my plate, my appetite gone. When I mentioned that I had submitted 5 job applications that day, including one for a promising business analyst position at a growing company in Madison, I hoped it might improve the atmosphere. "That sounds wonderful, honey," my mother said encouragingly. "When would you hear back?" "They said they'll conduct first-round interviews next week," I replied, trying to inject optimism into my voice. "My qualifications match exactly what they're looking for." My father set down his fork with deliberate slowness. "Just like the last 20 jobs were perfect matches?" he asked, his tone cutting. "James, please," my mother pleaded. "No, Lisa. It's time for some honesty here." He turned to me, his eyes hard. "You've been home for months with nothing to show for your expensive education but debt and excuses." "I'm trying, Dad," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "The job market is terrible right now. It's not just me, everyone from my class is struggling." "Everyone from your class isn't living in my house eating my food, running up my electric bill," he retorted. "Everyone from your class isn't sitting around applying for fantasy jobs while their parents work themselves to the bone." The injustice of his characterization stung sharply. "I'm not sitting around. I'm working at the library. I'm applying for jobs constantly. I'm doing housework." "Part-time at the library," he interrupted, his voice rising. 15 hours a week sorting books. That's your contribution." My mother reached for his arm. "She's doing her best, James. These things take time." He jerked away from her touch. "Time. Time we don't have. Do you know how close we are to losing everything? Do you—" The raw fear in his voice made me pause. I had known things were tight, but the desperation in his tone suggested something far worse. "What do you mean?" I asked quietly. "We refinanced the house to help pay for your college," my mother admitted, not meeting my eyes. "And with your father's business struggling—" "Struggling? It's dying." My father laughed humorlessly. "Johnson Construction has taken every contract in the county. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. My truck is about to be repossessed." The room seemed to tilt around me. "Why didn't you tell me it was this bad?" "Oh, now you want to know." His voice rose further. "Now you care about our finances. Where was that concern when you were racking up loans for your useless degree?" "My degree isn't useless," I protested, feeling tears threatening. "It's just a difficult economy right now." He stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "A difficult economy. A difficult economy." Each repetition grew louder. "Do you think I don't know that I've been fighting to keep my business alive in this difficult economy while you were attending frat parties and accumulating debt? That's not fair." I stood to, anger finally breaking through my composure. "I worked multiple jobs. I studied constantly. I earned academic honors. I did everything right." "Everything right," he was shouting now. "Then why are you back here? Why aren't you out there succeeding with your precious degree? Why are you still a burden on us?" The word burden hit like a physical blow. I stumbled back a step. "James," my mother gasped. But he was beyond hearing her. Years of financial stress, failing business, and wounded pride erupted in a volcanic outburst of rage. "You're just a burden. You cost us everything and give nothing back," he roared, his face contorted with anger. "We sacrificed everything for you, our savings, our retirement, our future. We're about to lose our home because of your education, and what do we have to show for it? A daughter who can't even support herself." Tears streamed down my face, but he wasn't finished. "We should have let you go to community college. We should have made you work full-time first. Instead, we indulged your dreams, and now we're paying for it. I'm paying for it every day, watching everything I built crumble while you sit around waiting for the perfect job to fall into your lap." My mother was crying now too. "Stop it, James. Please stop." No, she needs to hear this. She needs to understand what her choices have cost us. He turned back to me, his next words delivered with cold precision. "You're such a disappointment. If you can't contribute meaningfully to this household, you should move out. We can't afford to support you anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's soft sobs were the only sound as I stood frozen, his words reverberating through me. The father I had once idolized, whose approval I had sought my entire life, had just called me a burden and a disappointment. In that moment, something inside me shattered irreparably. Without a word, I turned and walked upstairs to my bedroom, closed the door, and leaned against it, struggling to breathe through my tears. Through the floor, I could hear my mother's voice raised in anger, rare for her, and my father's defensive responses. Their argument continued as I moved mechanically around my room, pulling out my suitcase and beginning to pack my belongings. I had no clear plan, no destination in mind. All I knew was that I couldn't spend another night in a house where I was considered nothing but a burden. As I folded clothes with trembling hands, the full weight of my father's words settled over me. He had been harboring this resentment for years, viewing my education not as an investment, but as a drain, seeing me not as a daughter to be proud of, but as a disappointment to be endured. Hours later, long after the house had fallen silent, my bedroom door opened softly. My mother stood in the doorway, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She took in the packed suitcases and duffel bags with a fresh wave of pain crossing her face. "You don't have to go," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "I can't stay, Mom. Not after what he said." My voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. She crossed the room and sat beside me on the bed, taking my hand in hers. "He didn't mean it. He's scared and stressed about money. He loves you, Bethany." "If he loved me, he wouldn't have said those things." The words came out flat, emotionless. The hurt was too deep for tears now. "Where will you go?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Samantha offered her couch a while back." "I'll see if that's still an option. I'll figure it out." My mother began to cry again, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry. This isn't how it was supposed to be." I hugged her, breathing in her familiar scent of vanilla lotion, and home, knowing it might be a long time before I experienced it again. "It's not your fault, Mom. I should have stood up to him sooner. I should have told you how bad things were getting with the business." "Would it have changed anything?" I asked quietly. She had no answer for that. We sat in silence for a long moment before she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "It's not much," she said, pressing it into my hand. "I've been saving a little from each paycheck. It should help until you get settled somewhere." I tried to refuse, knowing they needed every penny, but she insisted. "Please, let me do this much at least." By the time I finished packing, it was past midnight. I carried my bags downstairs quietly, not wanting to wake my father. My mother helped me load my car, both of us moving like sleepwalkers through the pain. At the car, she hugged me fiercely. "Call me when you get wherever you're going, please." "I will," I promised, though I wasn't sure if I meant it. "And Bethany, you are not a burden. You are not a disappointment. You are my brilliant, hardworking daughter, and I am so proud of you." Her words were a small balm on the gaping wound my father's outburst had left, but they couldn't heal it completely. As I drove away from the only home I'd ever known, the streetlights blurring through my tears, I felt untethered and adrift, cast out by the person who should have been my strongest supporter. I had nowhere definite to go, $45,000 in student debt, and a father's words echoing in my head. You're just a burden. You cost us everything and give nothing back. Samantha's voice was groggy with sleep when she answered my call at 1:30 in the morning, but it quickly sharpened with concern as I explained my situation through broken sobs. Come straight here, she said firmly. The couch is yours for as long as you need it. I'll text you my address. I drove through the night to Chicago, stopping only for gas and coffee, my father's words playing on repeat in my mind like a cruel soundtrack. By the time I arrived at Samantha's small apartment in a bustling neighborhood, dawn was breaking over the city skyline. She was waiting at the door in pajamas and a robe, her face etched with worry. One look at my tear-streaked face, and she pulled me into a fierce hug, not asking questions, simply offering the comfort I desperately needed. Inside her cramped but cozy one-bedroom apartment, I collapsed onto the couch, emotional and physical exhaustion finally catching up with me. Between hitching sobs, I recounted the confrontation with my father, each remembered word reopening the wound. He said I was a burden. I whispered the words still burning like acid. That I cost them everything and gave nothing back. Samantha's expression darkened with anger. That's bullshit, Bethany. Complete bullshit. You worked your ass off in college. You did everything right. Did I, though? If I did everything right, why am I homeless and jobless with a mountain of debt? You're not homeless, she corrected firmly. You're staying with me until you get on your feet. And you're not jobless, you just haven't found the right job yet. As for the debt, welcome to being a millennial in America. Her matter-of-fact tone was oddly comforting, normalizing a situation that had felt catastrophic hours before. She made me tea and toast, insisting I eat something before finally allowing me to sleep on her couch, an old Afghan tucked around me like a cocoon. I slept for 14 hours straight, waking disoriented in an unfamiliar room as evening light filtered through unfamiliar curtains. For one blessed moment, I couldn't remember why I was there or what had happened. Then the memory crashed back and the pain with it. Samantha had left a note explaining she was at work but would bring dinner. True to her word, she returned at 6:30 with takeout containers of pad thai and a determined expression. I've been thinking about your situation all day, she announced as we ate cross-legged on the living room floor. First, you're staying here until you find a job, no arguments. Second, Chicago has way more opportunities than Mapleton. Third, we're updating your resume tonight and hitting every job board tomorrow. Her brisk efficiency was exactly what I needed, giving me no time to wallow in self-pity. That evening, we reworked my resume, emphasizing skills rather than experience, and created a spreadsheet to track applications. The simple act of taking control of making concrete plans eased some of the helplessness that had been suffocating me. Within days, I had established a new routine. Mornings were spent submitting job applications from Samantha's kitchen table. Afternoons, I walked the neighborhood dropping off resumes at local businesses. By the end of my first week in Chicago, I had secured a waitressing job at a busy diner 6 blocks from Samantha's apartment. The pay was minimal, mostly tips, but it was income. It's temporary, Samantha reminded me when I expressed disappointment at falling back on service work. Just to keep you afloat while you find something in your field. 2 weeks after my arrival, I found a tiny studio apartment I could just afford on my waitressing income. It was a converted storage space above a laundromat with a shower so small I had to soap up in sections and a kitchenette consisting of a mini fridge, microwave, and hot plate. But it was mine, a space where I could begin rebuilding my independence. Moving in required using most of the money my mother had given me, leaving me with a precarious financial situation. I calculated every expense down to the penny-skipped meals, when tips were low, and learned to stretch a pot of lentil soup across 4 dinners. Despite these measures, I was barely keeping my head above water. The emotional toll was perhaps even greater than the financial one. Each night alone in my tiny apartment, my father's words would replay in my mind. You're just a burden. You cost us everything and give nothing back. You're such a disappointment. No matter how exhausted I was from double shifts at the diner, sleep often eluded me as I battled these toxic thoughts. My mother called several times in those first weeks, her voice tentative and worried. I answered briefly, assuring her I was safe, but offering few details about my situation. She never mentioned my father directly, though I could tell from her careful pauses that he was often nearby during our calls. These conversations left me emotionally drained, reopening wounds that had barely begun to scab over. One night, after a particularly difficult shift, where I'd been stiffed on tips by several tables, I broke down completely. Sitting on the edge of my mattress on the floor, I sobbed until my throat was raw and my eyes swollen. The magnitude of my situation crashed over me: my damaged relationship with my father, my financial struggles, my seemingly worthless degree, my uncertain future. In that dark moment, I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake, if perhaps I should have stayed home and accepted my father's judgment as deserved punishment. The next morning, puffy-eyed and hollowed out, I met Samantha for coffee before her work shift. One look at my face, and she knew. "Rough night?" she asked gently. I nodded, too emotionally exhausted to explain. "Listen to me," she said, leaning forward. "What your father said to you? That's his shit, not yours. His business problems, his mortgage issues, those aren't your fault. The economy sucks. The job market sucks. Student debt sucks. None of that makes you a burden or a disappointment. It makes you a normal 20-something trying to survive in an impossible system." Her words were like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. For the first time since my father's outburst, I considered that perhaps the failure wasn't entirely mine, that larger forces had contributed to my situation. That afternoon, I met Jennifer, another friend from college who lived in Chicago. Like Samantha, she listened to my story with growing indignation on my behalf. "Your father had no right to say those things to you," she insisted over coffee. "Parents are supposed to support their kids, not tear them down." Between Samantha and Jennifer, I began to build a small support network in my new city. They checked in on me regularly, invited me to free events around town, and occasionally brought groceries that would just go bad anyway when they knew I was struggling. 3 weeks after leaving home, I received another rejection email for a position I had been particularly hopeful about. Sitting in a coffee shop using their free Wi-Fi, I fought back tears of frustration. As I was about to close my laptop and head to my afternoon shift at the diner, a new email notification appeared. Professor Ellis. My business ethics professor from senior year was responding to a networking email I had sent days earlier. Not only did she remember me, but she offered to meet for coffee to discuss potential opportunities. The small spark of hope this ignited was the first positive feeling I'd experienced in weeks. Our meeting 2 days later proved transformative. Professor Ellis listened attentively as I explained my job search difficulties, occasionally jotting notes. "Your timing for graduation was unfortunate," she acknowledged, "but your qualifications are solid. Let me see your resume." She reviewed it with a critical eye, suggesting concrete improvements and offering to make introductions to several of her industry contacts. For the first time, I felt like a valuable professional rather than a burden. "The job market is tough, but not impossible," she said as our meeting concluded. "You need to refine your interview skills and target your applications more strategically." Over the next week, she helped me practice interviewing, pointing out when I undersold myself or apologized unnecessarily. "You have nothing to apologize for," she insisted. "You're qualified and capable. Own that." With her guidance, I refined my application strategy, focusing on smaller firms and growth sectors. Rather than sending out dozens of generic applications, I researched companies thoroughly and customized each submission. A month after meeting Professor Ellis, I secured an interview with Summit Consulting, a small but growing firm specializing in business analytics for mid-sized companies. The position was entry-level, but offered growth potential and utilized my business degree. I prepared meticulously, researching the company's projects and clients. The interview went better than any previous one. I spoke confidently about my skills and addressed my limited experience directly, emphasizing my ability to learn quickly. 2 days later, I received a call offering me the position with a starting salary that, while modest, would allow me to pay my bills and begin addressing my student loans. The moment after accepting the offer, I sat on my mattress and cried again. But these were different tears. The relief of finding professional employment, of taking a step toward financial stability, was overwhelming. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of the future I had envisioned for myself after graduation. When my first paycheck arrived, I stared at it for a long moment before depositing it. It represented more than money. It was validation that I wasn't worthless or a disappointment. That night, I bought proper groceries and cooked a real meal in my tiny kitchenette, a small celebration of this milestone. As I settled into my new job and began establishing a life in Chicago, I gradually allowed myself to create a home in my tiny studio. I found a secondhand nightstand at a thrift store, hung simple curtains, placed a small potted plant on my windowsill. These small touches transformed the space from a temporary shelter to a beginning. The wooden jewelry box my father had made me was the last item I unpacked, having kept it wrapped in a sweater at the bottom of a duffel bag. I ran my fingers over the carved initials, memories of a different father, a different relationship washing over me. With mixed emotions, I placed it on my nightstand, a complicated reminder of both love and pain. Despite these small steps forward, my father's words still echoed in my mind during quiet moments. I still cried myself to sleep some nights. The wound was healing, but slowly the scar tissue forming gradually over the raw hurt. 3 weeks after starting at Summit Consulting, as I was beginning to establish a new normal, my phone rang with my mother's number. It was unusual for her to call on a weekday evening, and a flutter of anxiety rose in my chest as I answered. "Mom, is everything okay?" Her voice came through strained and tearful. "Bethany, we need to talk. About your father." My heart froze at my mother's tone. "What happened? Is he okay?" "Physically, yes," she replied, her voice wavering. "But Bethany, there's so much you don't know. So much we should have told you." I sat on the edge of my bed, bracing myself. "I'm listening." Over the next hour, my mother unraveled a history I had been largely shielded from. My father's construction business hadn't just been struggling, it had collapsed completely 3 months before my graduation. The company he had built over 20 years had been forced to declare bankruptcy after losing a major contract that would have kept them afloat. He laid off 12 employees, men who had been with him for years, my mother explained. He had to sell most of his equipment at a fraction of its value. It destroyed him, Bethany. The depression that followed had been severe, she explained. My father, whose identity had been so tied to his business and his role as provider, fell into a dark place. He had started drinking more heavily to cope with his sense of failure and shame. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" I asked, stunned by these revelations. "He wouldn't let me," she sighed. "His pride wouldn't allow it. He didn't want you to know he had failed, especially while you were succeeding in college. He wanted you to focus on your studies." The irony was painful. While I had been carefully hiding my student loans to protect them from worry, they had been concealing their financial devastation to protect me from distraction. "The mortgage," I began hesitantly. "We refinanced to help with your tuition, yes," she admitted. "But we were managing until the business failed. Now we're 3 months behind and the bank has started foreclosure proceedings." The weight of this knowledge settled on me like a physical burden. I had known things were difficult but not catastrophic. "He blames himself," my mother continued softly. "For everything, the business failure, the house, your student loans. But Bethany, he projected that blame onto you that night. What he said, it came from his own self-hatred, not from how he truly feels about you." I struggled to reconcile this perspective with the vicious words he had hurled at me. "He called me a burden, Mom, a disappointment." "I know," she whispered, pain evident in her voice. "And I will never excuse that. But he's been in so much pain, carrying so much shame. When he saw your student loan statement, I think it just broke something in him. All his failures came crashing down at once." She paused, then added, 3 days after you left, he had a minor heart attack." My breath caught. "What? Why didn't you call me immediately?" "He made me promise not to," she said. "The doctor said it was stress-related, a warning sign. He's on medication now and he's supposed to be reducing his stress." I absorbed this information in stunned silence. My father, always so strong and capable in my childhood memories, had suffered a heart attack at 54. Despite everything, concern welled up alongside my hurt. "Is he going to be okay?" "Physically, they think so if he makes changes." Emotionally, she trailed off. He's not the same Bethany. He hardly talks. He spends hours just sitting and staring. And when he does speak, it's often about you, about how he drove you away. He regrets what he said. I asked, hating the small, hopeful part of me that still craved his approval. He's consumed by it, she confirmed. He won't say it directly. His pride is still in the way, but I hear him at night looking at your old photos muttering about how he ruined everything. A complicated mix of emotions swept through me, vindication, lingering hurt, and an unexpected sympathy. The father who had wounded me so deeply was suffering too, carrying burdens I hadn't fully comprehended. I don't know what you want me to say, Mom, I finally managed. I'm building a new life here. I have a job in my field now. I'm starting to heal from what happened. You have a job. She seized on this news, her voice brightening. Oh, Bethany, that's wonderful. What are you doing? I described Summit Consulting and my role there, relief washing over me as I heard genuine pride return to her voice. Your father would be so proud, she said. Then quickly amended, he is proud, Bethany. He just can't express it right now. We talked a while longer, catching up on the weeks since I'd left. As our conversation wound down, she finally asked the question I'd been dreading. Would you consider not coming home but maybe meeting somewhere, talking with him? I think it might help you both heal. My immediate instinct was refusal. The memory of that night was still too raw, the hurt too deep. I don't think I'm ready for that, Mom. I understand, she said, though disappointment colored her tone. But will you think about it? Not for his sake or even mine, but for your own peace. After we hung up, I sat motionless on my bed, trying to process everything I'd learned. The father I had fled from was not simply a cruel, disappointed parent, but a broken man projecting his own feelings of failure. It didn't excuse his words, but it contextualized them in a way that shifted my perspective slightly. I called Samantha, needing to process this new information with someone who had become my emotional anchor. Of course it doesn't excuse what he said, she agreed after I recounted the conversation, but it does explain some things. I don't know what to do with this information, I admitted. Part of me still feels so hurt and angry. Another part feels, I don't know, sorry for him. Those feelings can coexist, she pointed out wisely. You can be angry about how he treated you and still feel compassion for his situation. The next day, I discussed it with Jennifer over lunch. Her perspective was somewhat different. Parents mess up sometimes, she said thoughtfully. My mom and I didn't speak for almost a year after a huge fight when I was 21. When we finally talked again, it was awkward and difficult, but eventually healing. Not talking to her that year was harder than the work of reconciliation. I considered their different viewpoints as I walked to work, the Chicago wind whipping around me. The hurt my father had inflicted still felt raw, but the context my mother had provided created a small opening for potential understanding, if not yet forgiveness. That evening, I spoke with Professor Ellis about the situation. Her perspective, as always, was measured and thoughtful. Healing isn't linear, she reminded me. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can establish boundaries while still allowing for the possibility of reconciliation. Over the following days, I reflected deeply on these conversations. I thought about my childhood, the father who had taught me to fish and build things with my hands. I remembered his pride in my academic achievements, his support of my dreams. I weighed these memories against the cruel words of that final night, trying to determine which represented the truer version of him, or if perhaps both were equally real. A week after my mother's call, I made my decision. I wasn't ready for a face-to-face meeting, but I was willing to take a small step. I sent my mother a text. I'm not ready to talk to Dad directly yet, but you can tell him about my new job if you think it would help, and maybe in time we can think about meeting. Her response came quickly. Thank you, sweetheart. I know this is hard. I love you. That night, I took the wooden jewelry box from my nightstand and opened it for the first time since moving to Chicago. Inside were the few pieces of jewelry I owned, including a simple silver chain my father had given me for my 16th birthday. I held it in my palm, feeling its weight, remembering his smile as he'd fastened it around my neck. The memory brought tears, but they weren't entirely painful. For the first time since that terrible night, I allowed myself to consider that perhaps someday there might be a path back, not to what we had been, but to something new built on honest recognition of both the love and the hurt between us. 2 weeks later, I found myself driving to a small park halfway between Chicago and Mapleton, my stomach knotted with anxiety. After several more conversations with my mother, I had finally agreed to meet my father on neutral ground. The park had been my suggestion, a public place with no emotional associations for either of us. As I pulled into the parking lot, I spotted his truck immediately looking more weathered than I remembered. He sat on a bench near the duck pond, his posture uncharacteristically slumped. Even from a distance, I could see how much he had aged in just a few months. His hair seemed grayer, his shoulders more rounded. For a moment, I considered turning around and driving away. The pain of our last encounter still felt fresh, and seeing him brought it surging back. But I forced myself to park and walk slowly toward the bench, reminding myself that this meeting was as much for my healing as for his. He didn't notice me approaching, his gaze fixed on the water. When I stopped a few feet away, he looked up, and the naked emotion that crossed his face startled me. Relief, shame, fear, and longing all flashed across his features before he schooled his expression into something more guarded. "Bethany," he said, his voice rough. "You came." "I said I would," I replied, keeping my tone neutral as I sat at the opposite end of the bench, maintaining a careful distance between us. An awkward silence stretched between us, filled only by the sounds of ducks splashing in the pond and children playing on a distant playground. I waited, determined that he would be the first to speak meaningfully. After what felt like an eternity, he cleared his throat. "You look well," he offered tentatively. "Your mother says you found a job." "I did, at a consulting firm in Chicago." That's good." He nodded, his eyes returning to the pond. Another silence fell. I was about to say something just to break the tension when he suddenly spoke again, his voice barely audible. "I had a whole speech planned," he admitted. "Practiced it all the way here. Now I can't remember a word of it." Despite everything, I felt a flicker of sympathy. He looked so different from the imposing father of my childhood, or even the angry man who had lashed out at me that night. He looked lost. "Maybe just say what you're thinking," I suggested quietly. He took a deep breath, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "What I'm thinking is that I don't know how to fix what I broke. I don't know if it can be fixed." The raw honesty of this statement caught me off guard. I had expected excuses, perhaps, or attempts to minimize what had happened. His frank acknowledgement of the damage done opened a small door within me. "I don't know either," I admitted. "What you said that night, it hurt me more than anything ever has." He flinched visibly at my words. "I know, and there's no excuse for it. None." He paused, swallowing hard. "Your mother probably told you about the business. About everything." "She did," I confirmed. "But Dad, why didn't you tell me? I would have understood. I could have tried to help somehow." "My pride," he said simply. "I couldn't bear for you to see me as a failure. I was supposed to be the provider, the protector. Instead, I was watching everything I'd built crumble. And then there you were with your education and potential, and instead of being proud, I was jealous," I supplied when he trailed off. He looked surprised, then ashamed. "Maybe. Not of you specifically, but of your possibilities. Your future seemed so bright while mine was disappearing." The honesty of this admission hung between us. It was painful to hear, but also clarifying, helping me understand the complexity behind his cruel words. "When I saw your student loan statement," he continued, "it was like everything collapsed at once. All my failures as a businessman, as a provider, as a father, they all came crashing down. I lashed out at you because I couldn't face my own inadequacies." "That doesn't make it okay," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion building in my chest. "No," he agreed immediately. "It doesn't. Nothing makes it okay. I've replayed that night 1,000 times, wishing I could take back every word." He turned to face me fully then, and I saw tears in his eyes, a sight I had witnessed only once before at my grandfather's funeral. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Bethany. What I said was unforgivable. But I need you to know it wasn't true. Not a word of it. You have never been a burden. You have never been a disappointment. You are the best thing I've ever done in my life, and I destroyed our relationship because I couldn't handle my own failures." His voice broke on the last word, and he looked away quickly, embarrassed by his emotion. I sat in stunned silence, unprepared for the depth of his contrition or the effect it would have on me. The knot of hurt I had carried for months loosened slightly, not dissolving but shifting. "I'm still angry," I said finally, "and hurt. I don't think that goes away with one conversation." "I know," he nodded. "I don't expect it to. But," I continued carefully, "I also know that people say terrible things when they're in pain. And it sounds like you were in a lot of pain." "That's no excuse," he insisted. "No, it's not an excuse, but it is context." I took a deep breath, organizing my thoughts. I've been thinking a lot about our relationship, about all the good parts before things got so difficult. The fishing trips, working on projects together, how proud you were when I got academic awards. A ghost of a smile touched his lips at these memories. "Those things were real too," I said. "Just as real as what happened that night. I'm trying to hold space for both truths." He nodded slowly. "I understand. And I'll accept whatever boundaries you need to set. If you never want to see me again after today, I'll respect that, even though it would break my heart." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. The father sitting beside me was not the same man who had hurled those devastating words at me. Or perhaps he was but only one facet of a complex, flawed human being who had made a terrible mistake. "I don't want that," I said softly. "I don't want to never see you again. But I do need time, and I need our relationship to be different going forward. More honest, more equal." "Anything," he agreed quickly. "Whatever you need." We talked for another hour, carefully navigating the new terrain between us. He told me more about his business collapse, about his health scare, about the therapy he had reluctantly started. I shared details about my job, my tiny apartment, my gradual adjustment to city life. The conversation wasn't easy, flowing, or comfortable, but it was authentic in a way our interactions hadn't been for years. As we prepared to leave, I made a spontaneous offer. "If you want, you could come see my apartment someday, and where I work. Not right away, but maybe in a few weeks." The hope that flickered across his face was almost painful to witness. "I'd like that," he said simply. We parted with an awkward hug, both of us holding back from fully embracing the other, too much still unresolved between us. But it was a beginning, a small step on what I knew would be a long and uncertain path. In the months that followed, we built a new relationship slowly, brick by careful brick. Weekly phone calls gradually increased in length and depth. Occasional visits became less strained. My father attended therapy regularly, working through his depression and alcohol issues, while I focused on building my career and independence. 6 months after our park bench conversation, I received a promotion at Summit Consulting, along with a significant salary increase. When I called to share the news, my father's pride came through clearly, without the bitter undertones that had once colored similar conversations. "You earned it, Bethy," he said warmly. "I always knew you would do great things." The healing between us was gradual and nonlinear. Sometimes old patterns would emerge, triggering defensive responses on both sides. But increasingly, we were able to recognize these moments and address them honestly, rather than retreating into hurt silence. My mother's relief at our reconciliation was palpable. For the first time in years, she stopped walking on eggshells, her own personality re-emerging as the household tension dissipated. She later confessed that she had feared our family would never recover, that the fracture between my father and me would be permanent. Our first holiday together after the reconciliation was tentative, but healing. My father presented me with a gift, a handmade wooden jewelry box similar to the one he had given me before college, but more intricate, clearly the result of many hours of careful work. "To replace the old one," he explained quietly. "A new beginning." Inside was a simple card that read only, "I am so proud of you. Always have been, always will be." As my financial situation stabilized, I offered to help my parents with financial advice. My business degree proved useful as I helped them restructure their debt and create a sustainable budget. My father initially resisted, his pride still sensitive, but eventually accepted that this was part of our new, more balanced relationship. Through this journey, I learned profound lessons about family forgiveness and self-worth. I discovered that while family ties can wound us deeply, they also have remarkable capacity for healing. I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing, but rather choosing to release the hold that pain has over your life. Most importantly, I realized that my worth was never dependent on my father's validation or anyone else's. It had been within me all along, waiting to be recognized. The words my father spoke that night still exist in my memory. They probably always will, but they no longer define me or our relationship. They have become part of a larger, more complex story of human frailty, misplaced pain, and the difficult journey back to love. Have you ever experienced harsh words from someone you love that seemed to change everything? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing and sharing it with others who might be struggling with family relationships. Remember, even the deepest wounds can heal with time, honest communication, and the courage to take those first difficult steps toward reconciliation. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you strength and healing on your own journey.